guys, my name is Ismael Triviño and this is the Millennial Way Show. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much for being connected through our social media platforms. Today we're in a very, very special place, in a very special location. And we have a very, very interesting guest. And we're going to be talking about a very important and alarming topic, which is climate change and global warming. Today we are in Oleta River Park, which is Florida's biggest urban park in this area, and we have the honor and the pleasure to have as a guest Lucy Sherriff. For the people that do not know who is Lucy Sherriff, well, she's an environmental journalist. She's a filmmaker, director, executive producer, and she has worked for several media outlets worldwide, such as CNN, Washington Post, also Time Magazine, the BBC, The Guardian, The Atlantic, among many others. So, Lucy, it's a pleasure and an honor to have you with all the audience of the Millennial Way Show.
Thank you for having me.
Before we talk about your work and all the things, amazing things that you have been doing and you're doing, reporting about the importance of climate change, about the importance of environmental justice and environmental issues around the world, we are right now here in Miami, in the mangroves, and we decided to come here because this is one of the areas most affected or that are more in risk when we talk about global warming, when we talk about this very sensitive topic. From your expertise, from all the reporting that you have done around the world, what have you heard about this area and the future of this area with the impact of climate change and global warming?
So it's really interesting coming here, and you can see efforts to try and raise the streets to try and combat this sea level rise. But there's also, despite all these warnings, despite the very clear evidence that Miami is severely threatened by sea level rise, prices are still going up here. So there's still this desire to move here. It's still a very attractive place for people to move. So it's kind of confusing because it's hard to escape the fact that Miami is going to be underwater at some point, Miami Beach at least. And why are people still buying here? It's really interesting, and you kind of see efforts to combat it, such as pumps in the streets, but I don't really think that's going to be enough. So what happens is people are going to be trying to move inland to higher levels, such as Little Haiti, and then you have the people in Little Haiti priced out of that area. So it's a really interesting and fascinating example of a community, a city trying to cope with sea level rise.
We saw you recently, I think it was a few years ago, in I think the other side of the world, the other part of the world, in Antarctica. We saw you in these amazing glaciers, and you were talking about how these glaciers were melting. And we would like to know if those meltings in this other part of the world is also kind of interconnected from somehow with the sea rise level that is happening here in Miami, and how is that? Yeah,
I mean, everything's connected. It's very difficult to imagine how something happening in Antarctica will have an effect over here. But melting of the ice in Antarctica has two different effects. So the first effect is if it's sea ice that's melting, it's already in the sea, so it's not actually going to rise, it's not going to contribute to sea level rise, but what it does contribute to is global warming, because white surface reflects the sun. So if you have less white surface, if you have less ice, then the earth will absorb the heat rather than reflecting it back into the atmosphere. And then the second part is, if you have land ice melting, that is what contributes to sea level rise, because the ice that was previously on the land and not in the sea is melting and then draining into the sea.
We saw a documentary, fascinating documentary, The End of the World. Please tell our audience what is that documentary about and how close are we to this end of the world?
So it's a documentary about climate change that I filmed it when I was working at HuffPost, and we wanted to start a different conversation around climate change. We didn't want to make it so scientific that people couldn't understand it, but we also didn't want to dumb it down. So we were trying to find a good middle ground so that people would be engaged in it. And we wanted to offer people some solutions so they didn't leave after watching the documentary thinking, oh, we're all doomed. So we're kind of very much trying to strike that balance between optimism and realism. And, you know, like...
Just to understand, this was the first documentary that the Huffington Post was actually doing?
Yes, it was the first one they ever produced.
And you were the one
yes.
selected to make it happen?
Yes, so it was my idea, and I pitched it, and I managed to persuade them that it was a really important documentary to make, and if we were going to make a documentary, it should be about climate change. And we had a few experiments to try and kind of test the waters as to what people would be engaged with and how people would respond to a documentary. So we serialized it and we put the episodes out on Facebook, as well as building a whole separate platform for it. And people seemed to respond to it really well, which was
From
great.
that documentary, which will be the main message that you can share with our audience?
The main
strips from all those research.
I would say twofold. I would say firstly that everything that happens in Antarctica, as far as away as it might feel, has an impact on us. Wherever you are in the world, it has an impact. And the second message I would say is that it's all of our responsibility. So we looked at whose fault is it and whose responsibility is it, and we looked at business, we looked at politics, and we looked at the general public, us. And we wanted people to come to their own conclusions about what they could do to help, and we wanted to encourage people to do things, you know, what they could do themselves. So it's a really intimidating topic, and it's a topic that's very easy to just block out because it's such a big issue. And so we wanted people to go away and think, okay, well, I can do this small thing, and maybe that's what I do now, and maybe in a year's time I can do a bit more.
Well, I saw this documentary, and I really recommend it to all our audience that is watching right now. And I was very impressed about this term that I never heard about until I saw your documentary, and it's called the climate refugees. What's that?
So a climate refugee is someone who has had to flee their home because of climate change. So it could be drought, it could be hurricanes, it could be tsunamis, it could be rising sea levels. But the issue with climate refugees is it's not actually a category that's recognized by the world as a refugee status. So people who are fleeing their homes don't really have anywhere to go. There are a couple of cases actually from Pacific Islanders, so people from Kiribati and Tuvalu, who their whole country is threatened. Their whole country is going to be underwater in a matter of decades. And a couple of people who live there tried to seek asylum in New Zealand under this climate refugee status, and they couldn't get it because nowhere formally recognizes climate refugees as refugees. So it's a whole new term, it's a whole new status. Even though I think the term was coined in the 1980s, it's still something that the world hasn't quite got its head around how to deal with these kind of people.
Lucy, from all your trips and research, how bad is the climate change impacting planet Earth right now, and what worries you the most?
It's everywhere. You can't escape it. When you look at shortage of food, when you look at food prices, fuel prices, health impacts, you know, people moving from the coast because their homes are going underwater, you know, more extreme weather. It's everywhere. You can't run away from it. You can't escape it. And I think the thing that worries me the most is there's a couple things. So firstly, it's this kind of view that, oh, someone else will sort it, or, you know, oh, it's not my problem.
Lack of responsibility.
Yeah, it's not my problem. You know, you know, and that really bothers me because it's everyone's problem. And the other thing that bothers me is, as humans, we kind of have this arrogance that we're going to be fine, like, oh, we'll survive, whatever. Well, I don't think that's the case. If we sit back and we do nothing, we're not going to be fine. Like, what going to Antarctica taught me was that we are at the mercy of Mother Nature. You know, we can't stop sea level rise. We can't, you know, unless we take drastic action soon, we can't stop sea level rise. And we're not more powerful than the sea.
We are here in the Oleta River Park. You can see this beautiful mangroves location. But when the hurricane season happens, or when the rising sea level starts, this is one of the locations that is most affected, and the wildlife that is here also is affected, and the communities that are living surrounded are also affected. Are you a pessimist or are you an optimist in the future of sanctuaries like this all around the world?
I think I'm both. I don't like to admit that I'm pessimistic. I think I'm more of a realist. I don't think there's any point in just assuming that everything's going to be fine, because I think we've done that for a long time, and that's what got us here, right? At the same time, you have to be optimistic, otherwise you're just giving up on humanity. I think it was about a week ago, for the first time since the Industrial Revolution in the late 1800s, Britain went for a week without using coal. So that was a really big, that's a game changer. And now Britain is looking at estimates that the country may be powered by renewable electricity, or at least zero carbon, as soon as, I think it's 2080 or something. So there's a lot to be hopeful about, but at the same time we can't just rely on hope.
More action.
Yeah, more action.
Do you think that everybody, or the parts that are responsible for taking action, are they doing enough?
No. The people that make the decisions are in business and in politics. So you have to, and they're not doing enough. They're just not. So it's fallen down to the individual, to climate activists, to campaigners, to step up their game, to raise awareness about this. Look at Greta Thunberg. She's a young girl, and she's just captivated the imagination of the world. And that's one person. Can you imagine if everyone did that?
I was going to ask you exactly about her. Do you think that we need plenty of Gretas all around the world, and that impact and that voice of this 16-year-old girl is being way louder than many of the politicians?
Yeah, completely. The issue with politics is there's always an agenda, and if the individual steps up, they don't have anyone that's voting for them. They're just talking from the heart. They're representing their neighbours, their family. There's a real power in individuals, especially when we come together as a collective, to change things. And I think there's definitely an issue around people being fed up with politics. And I completely understand that, because I sort of dip in and out of that myself as well. But it is a reminder that that people do have the power to change things. We do have the power to vote politicians in and out of government. So vote for a politician that believes in taking climate action.
Lucy, which will be your best advice? And you can tell them right there.
My best advice
to all this new generation of investigative journalists, filmmakers, documentaries that are into the environmental issues, that are into these very sensitive topics, to don't give up, and to actually keep that action, keep that action. Of course.
I would say my best advice would be to stick with your passion. It can be really tiring. I get very tired. It can be very overwhelming. But if you follow your passion, it will pay off. And always look for the human story. Always look for the story behind the figures, the story behind the politics, because at the heart of it, there's always a human story. And that's what other people, that's what your viewers, that's what your readers connect with.
Well, guys, there you have it. The one and only Lucy Sherriff, here with us on the Millennial Way Show in Miami, Florida. Lucy, it was a pleasure and an
Thank
honor
you.
to have you, and congratulations. For us, you are an environmental champion, so keep the work, the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tell us about Colombian coffee.
Colombian coffee. Well, when I went to Colombia, I spoke to quite a few coffee farmers, and they were saying they are having problems with growing the coffee because of the weather. They can't predict the weather anymore. And so it's affecting the crops. And I think coffee and chocolate and bananas are the three foods that are going to be most affected by climate change.
Let me jump in.